Well, fair enough. Fair enough. You were moving on to religion.
Yes.
And we've got 15 minutes now. And I suppose, I mean, have you given much thought to cults, I suppose, how cults might differ to religion and how a cult leader comes into being?
Cult leaders are invariably narcissists. They have an absolute belief that they are set apart from other people, often exude huge amounts of charisma, which are utilized then to brainwash people, to manipulate them, to follow a particular ideal, to cause them to be cut off from friends and family so they can be more easily controlled, that they are specifically seduced. You know, they're sort of fishing for volunteers, fishing for members of the cult. The way that the narcissist at the top of the tree is a true believer. They absolutely believe that you know, in 6 years' time, the Earth's going to explode in a ball of fire and there's going to be this sudden ascension to planet Zog. They actually believe that. And then, as a combination of their manipulative wiles, they then imbue that view into other people. And they may find other true believers, which is what the internet facilitates more than anything these days. It allows the village idiots to connect up with one another, whereas once before they were isolated. But it also means that other people, people who are susceptible to this, can be drawn in who aren't narcissists. And they end up being brainwashed. But at the top of a cult, you'll find a narcissist because they have no concern for the way that the people are treated. Everybody is utilized as an appliance towards their ends of controlling them, for propagating their beliefs and what the cult stands for. Often people are abused in these cults. They have to go through initiations. They're often sexually abused. Often the cult leader, you know, has this harem that's there. People are told to donate huge amounts of money, etc. And so very much the case, you will find that I think it would be highly unusual if you were to find a cult that wasn't led by a narcissist.
And they tend to be led by men. I was just interviewing an ex-Hasidic Jewish woman yesterday, and somebody in the comments made that point. The cults inevitably turn into boys' clubs by the end, and as you pointed out, the sexual abuse seems to be. I mean, I'm not speaking anecdotally here, but it seems at least more than half of them. You know.
Yeah, I mean, often what will happen is that a man will establish a cult, and then as part of that, will utilize lieutenants, and they're often female. So Keith Raniere, he drew in a lot of women, yeah, and because then women are seen, in broad brush terms, as more empathic, maternal, softer, kinder. So if you were walking down a road at the dead of night, if you saw a man coming along, you might be some people would be a little bit apprehensive. What might happen if you saw a woman? They wouldn't be. There is that sort of stereotyping that goes on. So a narcissist will utilize female lieutenants because it's easier to draw people in with that individual. So, yeah, that's right. And those individuals become brainwashed and they're susceptible to the wiles of the narcissist. They want to curry favor with the narcissist. They want to be the chosen one for the narcissist. The narcissist provides things that individual is deficient in. Often they've got low self-esteem. Their self-worth is low. The narcissist presents as this ultra-confident, ultra-charismatic individual. So they, in a sense, they have their own needs met from the way the narcissist is behaving. And it's interesting. It's not something I'd actually considered as to why is it that cults are led more by men than they are by women. Because, of course, when it comes to the divvying up of narcissists, it's roughly 50-50 across the sexes. So I think possibly one part behind it is that simply the more outgoing aspects, not to say that there aren't outgoing women, but female narcissists tend to be harder to spot. They tend to operate with more covert behaviors. They tend to adopt this appearance of caring. Harry's wife being an example of that. Whereas the sort of more sort of alpha male character, you'll find more of those, leaving aside the male bit, but more alpha individual, you will see more of that behavior in men. And I suppose that perhaps lends itself to that climbing to the top of the tree and creating an organization in that way.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of something I've spoken about before, but Will Storr, the writer, popularized this idea of the status game and the three main types of status that evolutionarily we would have gone for, which would be dominance, success, and virtue. And some people can just be successful and they don't need to do any dominance or virtue signaling to sort of get to the top of their tribe. But I think typically, if you're out of ideas and you're like, well, how am I going to be this big, strong character? Like stereotypically, the man would go for dominance,
yes.
and women have often gone for virtue, but it can be the other way around as well.
I think as a proposition that holds up.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they talk about toxic masculinity being this kind of dominance, and a lot of women can express toxic masculinity just being sort of big and loud and dominant and pushy and shut. Just I've definitely met a lot of women like that. I've met more men like that.
Yes.
But there are also a lot of men who have the toxic femininity, like sort of the sneakiness and the virtue signaling and that kind of thing. I hope that doesn't offend men or women, because it's a generalization, of course, but it's just something I've heard.
Yes, and I think you find as well that with female narcissists, they will invariably use, as you've just pointed out there, there'll be those that will use virtue. I'm kind, I actually care, and you've had this problem, and be compassionate about it. And then you'll also have, of course, both sexes will use sex a lot, but it's often seen as, the idea of feminine wiles to draw somebody in, and the fairer sex. And of course, part of it is the conditioning that roles have been attributed through history, that basically comes down to this factor: women carry children, men don't. It's nothing to do with physical strength, because although as a whole men are deemed to be physically stronger, you can easily find plenty of women who are very physically strong. Go to the Olympics, for example. In medieval times, who was it who was working the fields just as much as the men? The women were. So they did backbreaking work, etc. They were carrying, going to get the water from the well and carrying those flagons of water and so forth. And so women are just as strong as men in that respect. What took them out of the game was the fact that for a period of time they had to have a child. And that meant that they were dependent largely. You'll find isolated examples, of course, but you'll find instances where they obviously have to have somebody that will look after them during that period of time, provide an income, provide food, because they can't, because they either immediately after childbirth, which is obviously very dangerous for women, they're not able to physically be up and about, or they basically have to stay and deal with this crotch goblin 24 hours a day. So consequently, the fact that they have to have a child takes them out of the dominance game, and so it's left for men. So that's why society became patriarchal. Now, if for some quirk in an alternate universe, the women got together and said, well, actually, those of us who aren't bearing children will look after the women that are bearing children, it would have been an interesting outcome. But that didn't happen.